What's going on, tubes? It's your boy Black Oni, and today we're taking a look at Wayfinder with a little bit more of an in-depth preview of what this game has to offer. Black Oni. Now, let's talk first impressions. Back when Wayfinder was known as Project Skylight, I got invited to not only play Wayfinder, but also help shape Wayfinder by providing feedback and participating in brainstorming sessions to tackle things like boss battles, co-op incentives, and stuff like that. Imagine my excitement when I learned that they just happen to be working alongside Digital Extremes, most well known for Warframe. And I, in many cases, am well known for being a Warframe advocate, so it was just a match made in heaven. So let's get down to the details. What is Wayfinder even? From the makers of Darksiders and Battle Chasers comes a tale of epic proportion. Take on the role of warriors known as Wayfinders who have the exclusive power to interface with and impact an unknown force called the Gloom. You, alongside your friends, enter procedurally generated dungeons, explore the shared open world, and take on various boss battles and large creatures. There's tons of variety in the environments, and lots of potential for expressing yourself through different gameplay interactions. And speaking of, you have access to a handful of characters to choose from at the beginning. Let me just look some up real quick. Wayfinder, starter, characters, Windrave. I've been calling him Warden, that's not his name. Yeah, okay. For the latest playtests, we had access to 3 characters with more you can unlock over time. Silo, Windrave, and Niss. Silo is the trickster gunslinger who provides DPS and debuff support abilities to help your team deal more damage and remove aggro. Silo's abilities all revolve around redirection, debuffing, and damage. His first ability, Firebomb, synergizes perfectly with his second ability, Oil Bomb. Firebomb, as you would imagine, deals AoE fire damage that lights him on fire and deals damage. Pretty basic stuff. But things get a little more interesting when you factor in you get 2 charges of this and Oil Bomb, which slows enemies and causes them to take additional damage, amplifies the damage you do with your Firebomb and other abilities. Action getting a little too intense? Don't worry about that. You've got Radiant Clone, which causes Silo to dash backwards, leaving behind a hologram projection that not only taunts enemies, but it also removes aggro for a bit. This is a great tool for repositioning, whether you're getting overwhelmed by enemies or want to group enemies together better for additional follow-up attacks, or if you need to revive a fallen teammate. Ground Zero is his final ability, which sends out a little robot egg thingy to shock enemies, slow them down, and damage them in the process. It has a pretty decent AoE, so you can never go wrong with this. Then there's Windrave, who in typical fashion is great at tanking, breaking armor, and supporting teammates. Although on paper his archetype is more of the basic bitch of MMOs, his kit is versatile as hell and has a bit of a twist to it. See, he's a healer tank, which means he's immensely useful for the team. He can provide buffs for the team, absorb incoming damage, and heal. His first ability, Righteous Strike, hits the enemy and shoots out healing energy for Windrave and nearby allies. Radiant Pulse forms a shield that blocks projectiles and gives a defensive boost to your squad behind you. It also damages enemies with a pulse effect. Judgment is another healing ability that marks enemies and heals allies for each time they hit that marked enemy. His ultimate creates a barrier of protection that makes him invincible and your team invincible while within the barrier. It's pretty dope stuff. Lastly, we have my personal favorite, Niss, who's a slap-chopping, ninja-blending, certified badass. As the glass cannon of the starters, her abilities are all focused on evasion and damage. Her first ability is Shadow Step, which is a single or multi-dashing attack that leaves behind a Gloom clone, which can be spammed to do a second dash. Her next attack, Umbral Aura, buffs her dodge into a dodge attack, which makes her next 3 dodges cause piercing damage to nearby enemies. And in true FGC fashion, her third ability is a fucking Rekka command, which not only gives you iframes, but damages enemies and allows you to follow up with an additional attack or an additional dodge move afterwards. Lastly, her Gloom Shroud, which synergizes perfectly with her first and second ability, allow you to spam dodge and shadow step as much as you want during the duration to leave behind tons of damaging clones and evade attacks in the process. She's also the only character, at least as far as I understand, with a proper parry mechanic with her daggers, and really rewards understanding your enemy and punishing if you really just don't know how to do that. She's a high risk, high reward character who favors skill above all. There's a bunch of stuff I especially love about the combat. Every character can use any weapon and each has their own passes and favor a particular playstyle over others. Windrave's Sword and Shield allows you to block incoming attacks with no other weapon in this playtest allowing you to do that. Silo's weapon, the rifle, has this really cool mechanic that is similar to something that you've seen in Gears of War, where it is active reload, which gives him a fire rate boost, which increases DPS over time. This allows you to have a little bit more of a nuanced skill-based approach to the way that you play and the way that you reload. And in addition to that, you have what's known as these weak spots that show up randomly. If you hit those weak spots, they do additional bonus damage and stagger the enemy. So you always have something interesting going on with these characters as opposed to just shoot them in the head and they're dead. And then I mentioned before, Niss is really the only weapon that has the ability to parry. Once again, this really creates this synergy between the characters with their weapons of choice. But again, you can use any of these weapons on any character you want. So if you want your Niss to have a rifle instead, that is an option. And I love that they don't restrict your playstyle based on that. Just like in Warframe, you have echoes, or for all intents purposes, mods and mod slots. These all modify stats and abilities to help you build more interesting and diverse loadouts. And on top of that, each of the lost zones allow you to apply random modifiers to the ruin to increase and diversify your rewards upon completion. The offerings are dense and satisfying. And we can't forget about the visuals here. Joe Mad, best known for his involvement as a comic book artist, working on titles such as X-Men and Avengers Ultimates, Battle Chasers, and the game series known as Darksiders, is the creative visionary behind Airship Syndicate, and conversely, Wayfinder. He's one of my all-time favorite artists, and getting to meet him was incredible. But add on top of that, basically doing an art exchange where he handed me copies of some of the comics he's done, and I handed him a copy of Anikara, the comic book that I wrote and illustrated. By the way, you should totally buy that shit. And sit down with the leadership team in an interview discussing how everything works, from gameplay to storytelling. All of that was just so dope. My favorite factor, this game is beautiful. The world, the character designs, the intentionality of every element that's in here, and even the way that the smoke billows in this game. You know, I hate to draw comparisons to so many other things, but have y'all seen Arcane, the League of Legends animated series that was on Netflix? Remember how like the light bloomed in that, and like the neon signs glue and the smoke billowed? It reminded me so much of that vibe, but we were actually playing that in an MMO environment, and it just felt so sick. There's a fantasy meets tech aesthetic to this whole package that leans into the overall theme of the game. It's all about variety and flexibility. You'll see a mixture of enemies, from mercenary tech enemies to loincloth goblins and spider monsters, and way more than that I don't want to tell you too much about yet. Each character has their own different feel, color palette, and set of clothes unique to their aesthetic. One of Airship Syndicate's strengths as a studio is in their art direction and ability to stimulate gamers with really awesome stuff to look at all times, and this seems to be no exception. The thing that I was most bummed about before I even started playing was when they mentioned that there was no custom character creation in the game. Y'all know me. I love creating characters in games, especially with character creations that are getting so much better these days. I'm talking about Neo and Black Desert Online and Wild Hearts as well. There's so many games that are doing a phenomenal job with their character creators. But after playing it, learning about the story and seeing how much you can actually customize existing characters to make them more of your own version of them, the more I realized this wasn't a mistake or wasn't even a negative. It was just something that was different that made the game its own distinct thing, and making these characters shine in ways that you may not have been able to do unless you were able to have as much intimate time with them by playing them. I think they did a good job of giving us something to still play around with these existing characters. Overall, this game is shaping up to be a promising game from a studio who has a lot of experience with action RPGs and visually compelling games. And they partnered with arguably the best free-to-play action RPG studio, Digital Extremes, to work on this game. I can't guarantee that this will be a perfect video game, but it'll be hard for them to not do well considering all the things that are working in their favor. And adding on top of that, crossplay functionality is in the game, it's working well, and this just ensures that more people are going to be able to play with each other more regularly. Keep this shit on your radar, gamers. This is one to look out for. Like the video, make sure to press that follow button and subscribe to stay tuned to everything else coming to the channel. And as always, my name is Black Oni, and I'll catch you on the next video. Game on, and Black Oni out. Silo's abilities all revolve around... Wow, that was weird to say. Lastly, we have my personal favorite, Niss, who's a slap-chopping, ninja-bleeding...